Can I tell you a story? Recently I played Fears to Fathom, a perfectly good game with an episodic structure where you take the role of a person on Reddit telling his scary story.
Now, the first chapter of the game probably left the strongest impact on me because of this one scene where you suddenly realize that
it is midnight, you're home absolutely alone, you haven't closed any doors, and there's someone with a knife ringing at your door. As the situation intensifies, fear and horror grip us, and the atmosphere becomes increasingly tense. This moment has left an indelible mark in my memory. The unsettling ambience, the color grading, the uncanny texture resolution differences.
They all made me feel uncomfortable, and yet I liked it. I liked that I was paralyzed by fear. I
liked that my heart rate was through the roof.
And even after I got jump scared, I still enjoyed the experience.
And while Fears to Fathom does stand out as the one of the more memorable horror games I played,
there are many others that still made me feel that dread, that feeling of unease you just want to go away.
However, even though horror games are very polarizing, it seems like a large fraction of gamers value their thrill.
Of course, in real life, business, family, relationships, we never wish to experience any sort of stress.
Yet once behind the screen, we wouldn't mind getting into exactly those gruesome situations.
Naturally, there has been some research on how fans of horror can generally be more prepared to deal with stressful moments in their lives, but
this is not what I want to talk about in this video. What I want to talk about is why. Why do we like being unsettled?
Why do we voluntarily choose to experience something negative? Why do we decide to go into the unknown, hostile environment and even pay money for that? If you clicked on this video, chances are you're familiar with Iron Lung, but in case you're out of the loop here, Iron Lung is a game set on a planetary moon with an ocean of blood. You play as a convict and are guaranteed freedom if you successfully complete your mission. Your task, however, is not going to be easy. Your objective is to go around seafloor and take photos of relics at the points marked on the map. However, you are forced into an old, rusting submarine that has not been made for the depths they plunge you into. So, the glass window that would have allowed you to see ocean is closed off. The sub is sealed shut, and the only means of interaction with the outside world is the old camera on the other end of the sub you take pictures with. As unsettling and hostile of a setting as it gets if you ask me. Yet this 30-minute game collected just shy of $1 million on Steam. Hundreds of people have talked about it and millions have played it or seen someone else do that. And for a reason, there is something deeply unsettling about the solitude of the rusty can, not designed for the abyssal depths you navigate. A vast ocean of blood that surrounds you, visible only through the lens of a dated, low-resolution camera, and the relentless pressure from the ocean that threatens to crush your puny submarine, intensifying the horror of your situation. But why do we like this? Why do we enjoy being the protagonist of a horrifying story? Why do we like horror games? If I presented you with a plate of delicious spicy curry and a plate of a regular old stew, which one would you choose? Keep your choice in mind because I'm going to come back to it.
One of the better researches I could find on the consumption of horror as a recreational activity tried to correlate fear levels, enjoyment, and heart rate. In this study, 100 Danish students were divided into random groups and sent through a specially designed haunted house attraction. The study found that there's a pretty consistent upside-down U-shaped correlation between how scary the attraction was and how much people enjoyed it.
Interestingly though, people preferred the highly terrifying attraction to the mildly scary one.
So, generally we prefer stronger fear, and this preference translates well into the medium of horror games. Horror games that aren't very scary, with some exceptions of course, flop.
Horror games that hit that sweet spot of horror explode, and those that are way too scary or grotesque develop their own smaller communities. One of my favorite TV shows I watched as a kid was Mind Games on National Geographic. When I think of it, one specific episode comes to mind. The statue trick. The testers put a person that looks exactly like a statue thanks to great makeup into a random park, and whenever people would come close to it, the said person would jump scare them. Since the fear ties into our fight or flight response, the testers found out that people who weren't hungry normally ran away, whereas hungrier and more aggressive people would punch it. However, most of us, when jump scared, just scream, because we normally understand what we signed up for. So here's the science part. When you experience fear, a part of your brain called the amygdala kicks into high gear. The amygdala is responsible for pituitary adrenocortical response, or basically the release of adrenaline, heightening of blood pressure, and all that stuff you normally associate with horror games. What it also does, however, is release endorphins. You know, those little guys that make you feel great when you exercise or do other activities. And remember how I asked whether you would choose a spicy curry or a regular stew? Well, turns out that endorphins are also released during the consumption of spicy foods and even chocolate.
So there is some correlation between those people that like spicy food and those that enjoy horror games. Told you I would come back to it. You know, just the other day I downloaded a game called Teke Teke from itch.io.
It's a fairly straightforward story based on a Japanese urban legend about a vengeful spirit haunting train stations and, of course, ending people's lives. What got me nervous though is when I just thought that this might be more of a psychological horror without much happening, the lights turned off and my only instruction was to get back home. So I pressed shift, I got out of the store, I ran straight to my house like I was in the Olympics, and yeah, I got spooked. There's no point in even continuing that sentence. Right before I entered my house, I got jump scared, naturally. But even though I was scared, deep down I understood that all of this was just pixels. And this is what every one of us understands, no matter how scary the game is. After getting scared, we immediately assess the situation and realize that there is no real threat. However, we can still feel the effects of those endorphins, that high blood pressure, higher oxygen flow into our brains, and dopamine, which makes us feel so refreshed and nice.
But why do people then seem to stay away from the horror? Well, kind of the same reason why they don't like spicy food. Remember Slenderman? Yeah, that guy. Do you remember how big of an impact it had? It gave birth to literally hundreds of parodies, from games like Rake to absolute masterpieces like Teletubbies Slenderman. This game arguably shaped the landscape of modern horror game genre, or, you know, a better example of this would be Fortnite at Francis. I don't even have to mention all the fan games and the explosive impact it had on the horror industry as a whole. You probably know that already. In both these games, you're not the hero, not by a long shot. You hold no power, you're weakened, your only objective is to survive against these supernatural entities, some that bend time and stuff, and some that want to put you in a fursuit. People would just naturally not dig that. They wouldn't want to be in a position of prey, because no one wants to be defenseless, no matter what the endorphin hit will be like later. This is also why games like Resident Evil and, well, Prey, or in general survivor horror, feel fundamentally different to me than normal horror games. They feel more like shooters with grim backstories and concepts than horror games that are meant to strip you down to your core and put you in a weak position. I mean, can you really say that you're scared when 90% of the time you're rocking a shotgun and one taps the zombies or something? But while funny sounding chemicals are the key behind enjoyment of horror on the biological aspect of things, there is another side to it, the one I like better, and so much so that I believe it deserves its own video. It is what differentiates good horror games from great ones, and it is the story.
Remember Iron Lung? In a somewhat recent update, the game's story has expanded and the world has matured. Now, I'm not the most knowledgeable person when it comes to Iron Lung lore, but here's the general idea.
Iron Lung is set in a far, distant future where humanity seems to have become a spacefaring species, until suddenly all of the stars and planets in the universe disappear in an event called the Quiet Rapture. Only the humans that were on moons or spaceships during the Quiet Rapture survived, bringing the total number of humans alive to a couple of thousand. From there on, the small number of people present divided even further, eventually forming two major fractions, Eden and the Consolidation of Iron. You are a convict that has been captured by the Coalition of Iron.
And just like Romans forced slaves to win in a coliseum to gain their rights, you are put in a submarine and forced to explore the seabed to earn your freedom.
But speaking of oceans and stories though, Subnautica is not a horror game. At least not classified as one.
It is formerly an action-adventure game developed and published by Unknown Worlds Entertainment.
You control a janitor who is the only survivor of a spaceship crash on an alien planet. You can explore this oceanic planet, but your main goal is to return. Now, Subnautica is a game that puts its world and story first, kinda like Iron Lung, but the horror of Subnautica is much more real. When you land on the planet, you can fix a radio receiver inside your drop pod, which will give you allocations of other drop pods. The more of them you find though, the more you will understand that you are completely stranded on this alien planet. The thing is, you will not have enough oxygen in your tank to reach some of the later pods. This will require you to build submersibles. You can build them and upgrade them to go to a certain depth, and eventually you can craft the absolute chonker and engineering marvel named Cyclops. The Cyclops isn't the fastest mode of transportation, but
it can serve as a massive mobile base. It can also have sonars, shield generation systems, torpedoes, and serve as a carrier for smaller and more mobile submersibles. The Cyclops can be transformed into a massive mobile fortress, yet it is still nothing compared to the ocean. The planet you landed on has its own unique ecosystem with many ecological zones, some really nice looking, some that are pretty scary, some that are terrifying, and some that will tear you and your Cyclops apart. Horror is one of these genres that can hit hard on a personal level by putting effort into the story and making you more invested in it. Sure, most horror experiences are pretty superficial, but those that make you feel the setting, make you sense the atmosphere, immerse you in the story, they can make you feel something that isn't fear and change something deep within you by transmitting their stories through our primal emotions. Silent Hill 2 is a game that needs no introduction, but just in case you don't know its plot, here's the basic idea. Our character James travels to the city covered in eternal fog, the Silent Hill, after receiving a letter from his long-dead lover Mary. The point of this game is very interpretive and isn't cut and dry, but we can see pretty confidently that at its core it is a story about regret, grief, and mourning. We all have bad days and bad weeks and sometimes even bad months. Those times seem to never end, and while our misery can't compare to characters like James, we as humans can still relate to them. We can feel what they feel. We can experience the story through them. We can see ourselves in the characters no matter how much more bad and grotesque situation they find themselves in. In a way, it's a form of catharsis. All that stress and negative emotions can escape through experiencing the story of a character like James. When you travel through the city, you are always greeted with adversities, and yet you must continue, push through the fog in hopes that it disappears. And while it might clear up for a time, it's always there. You can never escape it. You just have to live with it. These kinds of deep connections are something that horror games often excel at. But on the other hand, we have Soma, a horror sci-fi published by the creators of Amnesia, which pretty much tells you what it's all about. Soma is grounded in something deeply human. Our main character, Simon, survives a fatal car accident that kills his close friend and leaves him with a permanent brain injury and about 30 days to live. He decides to sign up for experimental treatment for his condition, and then we wake up. Seemingly, we find ourselves in the same room, but far in the future. We later find out that about 90 years have passed since we sat down at that chair. Naturally, this is impossible with a human body, and the revelation of truth of what happened to Simon that day breaks him. His mind was uploaded to a database, essentially creating a second, digital Simon. When we wake up 90 years later, we are not the original Simon. The original Simon passed away 30 days after the upload. Instead, we are a robot, a very basic humanoid parody of a man's body. What's more important though is, are we Simon? Do we qualify as an authentic human being even when it's just an illusion? What is the difference between being controlled by electrical impulses on wires made of flesh and fat and being controlled by electric impulses on wires made of metal and silicon? Is there one? What does it mean to be a copy of somebody? Are you just a copy of Simon? Nothing more, nothing less, just a piece of circuitry inscribed with someone's thoughts and memories. This game certainly deserves its own video on the nature of being human, even though dozens of other people have already made them. But I think there is something unique in our ability to connect with Simon as we get more immersed in the story. When we spend such a journey with a single character through all the hardships right before the reveal, the core ideas of the game stick with us. This is what sets horror games apart. Their impact extends far beyond mere jump scares. The concepts presented will always be in your head. You won't think of them all the time, but they will be there, waiting for the opportunity, the trigger to spring up. Horror games are weird. We make them as frightening and thrilling as we can, and yet we still enjoy them. Writing this video made me better understand our deep fascination with this genre. Not only do they act as a recharge for our emotional batteries and offer a unique form of catharsis, they provide a refreshing and invigorating experience, cleansing our minds in a way that nothing else can. What sets horror apart is its ability to create gripping narratives. These games tell stories that stick with us, characters whose experience we relate to on a profound level.
Horror games tap into our deepest fears and anxieties, resonating with our very souls. So, as you venture deeper into the world of horror games, remember that it is more than just the scares and the chemicals. It's about the emotions they evoke, the stories they tell, and the impact they have on our very being.